We're now joined by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Richard Wagner. Justice, thank you for being here today.
Good afternoon. My pleasure to be here.
Listen, I want to begin with the comments you were making about public confidence in the court. Do you see that confidence being eroded or undermined right now?
Well, I think we have a good situation in Canada in general. But my fear is that we should not be too careful about that situation. In other words, it could be insidious. And, we see what's going on in other countries very close to us. So we have to be very careful not to accept any attempt to discredit the institutions and the judicial system essentially. So that it's only to prevent any further damages. But I think we have a good democracy in Canada. I think that people understand that the rule of law is essential for our democracy. And I think we have a good judicial independence. So I think it's going well. But you will see more and more in social media some disinformation and misinformation. And that could be damaging for democracy.
Mm-hmm. Damaging for democracy, as you say, because to pick up on your point, in your news conference, you were talking about it is fair to debate a decision. It's another thing to debate a judge or who appointed that judge in that role. And I'm wondering, was it a particular incident or a statement that led you to reflect on this potential threat?
Well, misinformation and disinformation is a topic of many discussed in many areas in the world. I was invited recently at the G20 summit. The G20 summit is the summit of all the chief justices of the G20 countries, and one of the topics was misinformation and disinformation, and to what extent that the Supreme Court of Brazil decided to set up a specific program to counterattack disinformation. It goes to show to what extent this phenomenon is present everywhere in democracies. So there were a few incidents in Quebec where there was some misinformation about the nature and the extent of a judgment that we rendered a couple of months ago. There were some comments made by one elected official about the fact that judges who have rendered one type of decision were appointed by the federal government. So that type of comments, I think that I want people to be careful not to make them in the future, because it could discredit the institution. And there are some people who may be vulnerable and will give some trust to those statements. So that's why we have to be careful. And I said this morning that we need the traditional media, who are governed by a code of ethics, will give the proper information, the right information. And that's very important.
Mm-hmm. Traditional media, as you say, but what about the role of government? Because you cite a Brazilian example. Is there a role that the federal government could be playing more of in order to help protect the independence of the courts?
I think that every stakeholder in society and in the justice system has a role to play. So government, elected officials may legislate on this issue to make sure that this information does not create too many problems. And the media has a role to play, and the judges and the courts, to some extent, have a role to play as well. Not to be on the public sphere, but to write decisions clearly. For instance, to make sure that people have access to their court and to do their part as well.
Mm-hmm. Before our interview, I just did a quick search online about justices who have, or judges who have been under threat. And, the number of countries where it has happened is actually quite long. As you say, one very near neighbor, Supreme Court of Colorado, their justices were under threat over a decision. In South America, a few other examples there popped up. Have you ever heard of that happening here in Canada quite yet?
Not to that extent. But there were some comments made on social media in every province, I would say, that would fall in that category. But it's not as extensive as it is in other countries.
Okay. You know, before we're done, I also want to ask about an update, because last year during your annual news conference, you raised a red flag about the number of judicial appointments that were still open and how the impact that was having on the delivery of justice in this country. Recently, the government has been moving very quickly to fill in those spots, but I believe you're the one that stated the fact that there's still 57 vacancies to be filled. How worrying is that for you?
Well, as of June 1st, there are still 57 open space on the court. I think there was some improvement for the last 12 months. Obviously, the red flag was seen by government. Obviously, they took our concerns seriously, and they were able to appoint judges in a more timely fashion. But it's a work in progress, so it's not the final result. I think it's a work in progress, and we have to make sure for the next couple of months that the government continue to make those appointments on a timely fashion, and that we'll watch this file very closely.
Mm-hmm. And of course, there's also retirements, and it had me thinking, as you were addressing that in your news conference as well today, you know, you were noting the fact that on average, it seems to be the practice that a judge will give about a 6-month notice period before retirement. Does there need to be some type of regulation, codification, where it's a longer period than just 6 months, so that the court can be ready, that the Attorney General's office could be ready to fill those positions so that they are never left open?
Yeah. So what you're suggesting is very reasonable. I think it's up to the elected officials, to the government, to decide on the scheme according to which these appointments will be made. I don't think it's up to us, the judges, to decide, you know, you should appoint judges within a month, 2 months, 3 months from the date you received a letter of resignation, for instance. But I think it should be made within a reasonable delay. What I'm saying is that government on the federal level knows about the date when a position will become vacant. They know that many months in advance. So they should find a scheme to make sure that the position will be filled once the post is vacated. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a way, because they've done it for the last couple of months. I think they should find a way to do it for the future.
Before we're done, I want to go back to democratic institutions. We began by talking about that. I'm wondering, you know, when you reflect on this annual news conference that you give, how important is it for you to be able to answer those questions and give that statement when we talk about the trust in public institutions?
Well, I think it's very important. I've decided when I became Chief Justice to find ways to initiate steps to make the court more transparent, to give the right information, to make sure that people had access to our decisions. So that's why we had, you know, the case in brief on one page. People can learn about a decision in accessible language. We have the annual review. We sat outside of Ottawa two times in the past. I have my press conference once a year. We have nothing to hide. I want people to know what we're doing, because we have a good system. In spite of our challenges, in spite of lack of funding, sometimes in spite of lack of judges, we have still a good justice system. And people should know about it. And they should know it's difficult for people to appreciate something that you don't know. So my concern is to make sure that people know about the court, know about the judges, know about our work, how we do it, and why we do it.
Chief Justice, always appreciate the time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.